Welcome to a tutorial on how to use the Drum Machine Designer in Logic Pro X. In order to start using and configuring a Drum Machine Designer, we have to insert it on the channel strip right here. And this brings up the editor for our new empty kit. Now, of course, I can load a previous kit, and I can also import any type of sounds here from the left into any of the empty slots. These are all sounds that are in Logic, and I can just use them and drag them into any of these empty locations. As you can see, each slot has a certain name, and it's important that you load in each slot the correct sample, because then we can use it in a very easy way to program drum machine patterns. So I can just take any of the ones that are available here and just load them, and as you can see, they're going to be loaded automatically. But what I'm really interested in is how to create our own kit using our own samples. To do so, the process is very simple. What I need to do is to browse on my desktop or my hard disk, wherever my drum samples are, and then just drag them into any of these locations. Let's try. Here I have a folder with some vintage drum machine samples from the legendary Alesis HR16A. I have named them according to their content, and now it's very simple to just load them into our empty kit. Again, as I said, it's very important that you load them in the correct slot. As you can see, each slot has a name assigned to, and so my close hi-hat is gonna go right here, and see the sample was loaded. I have my claps here, my crash, and so on. So just make sure to load all the samples you have into each slot. Once I have all my samples loaded, I have the kit ready to go. As you see, every time I select a certain slot, I'm going to see the waveform of the samples that was loaded, and I can choose the type of sample playback I can have. For drums sounds, usually you have to select one shot, which means whenever I trigger that sample, the sample is going to be played from beginning to end without looping. If I choose classic, this one will be triggered when I press a key, but it will keep playing only if I keep the key pressed. So in general, the one shot is what you're looking for. You can also record your own sample right inside the drum machine if you want. For each slot, I can change the triggering key, and I can mute or solo it. The sample can also be played forward or reversed. For example, if I want to take my crash and play it reversed, that's what I would get. So it can be useful to do certain type of effects. I can also go to my sample detail, and here I have some control over some important parameters. For example, I can repitch the sample. So if I go to my kick and I'm thinking, well, I would like something a little bit deeper, I can pitch shift it right here. I can apply a filter if I want, and I have different types of filters here. So for example, on my cymbal, if I want to make it darker, I could use a low pass filter. And this is useful to create some effects, or even just to tweak the sample a little bit. I can also change the panning, and this is useful if you want to have already a good panning right from the drum kit. So for example, if I want my hi-hats to be panned slightly to the right, I can just do it right here. For each slot, I can also assign the sample to a specific group. This is useful, for example, if you want to have the open hi-hat being stopped by a closed hi-hat sample. So if I assign all my hi-hats to exclusive group 1, and the polyphony of each of these samples is set to 1, which means I can only use one note at the time for that specific group and sample. What happens is that when I trigger an open hi-hat, if I press a close hi-hat right after it, it's going to stop the open hi-hat. So this is very useful, again, if you want something to be not overlapping a certain sample, but instead having a sample being kind of choked by another sample. As long as they belong to the same group and the polyphony is set to 1, I'm all set. As you can see, it tells you the group a sample or slot is belonging to by this number up here. So these 3 samples or slots are actually assigned to group 1. They all belong to the same group. For each sample, I also have 2 LFOs, low frequency oscillators, and a modulation matrix that allows me to assign the LFOs or any other source to certain target parameters. For example, I could have an LFO 1 controlling the pitch. This determines the amount with which the LFO will control the pitch. So in this case, I have the LFO1 controlling the pitch for my crash. So that means when I trigger the sample, I have the LFO changing the pitch of my crash. So this is useful to create certain effects if you want. And this is very, very powerful because I can have any internal or external source, including MIDI control changes, control any parameter that I want. So very, very powerful. Now, of course, if I don't want the LFO to control anything, I'm just set it up to none. I have also access to 3 envelope generators. The third one is for my amplifier. This controls the volume over time of my sample. So this cymbal has a very short attack. But if I want a slower attack, I can simply make the attack longer of this envelope, and I will have the cymbal kind of faded in. In general, for percussive sounds, you want it very short. But I also have 2 extra envelopes that can be assigned to any parameter I want. For example, I could assign the first envelope, which is called the pitch envelope, to control the pitch. So the pitch is going to go up and down. And then I have a second envelope, which is called the filter envelope, that can be assigned also to control another parameter. So as you can see, you have a lot of controls. You have 2 LFOs, 2 envelopes, plus the envelope of the amplifier. So very, very powerful if you plan to alter the sounds over time, either in a cyclic way with the LFOs or on a start and end point way with the envelopes. Once you have configured all your samples and slots with all the modulations that you need, remember to save your kit. To save the kit, right here in my library tab, down at the bottom, I have a save button. If I tap save, I'm going to be asked to name the kit and then just hit save. Now that kit is going to be available in your library in Logic. So very, very easy and very, very intuitive to save the kit. One thing to notice also is that when you create a drum kit designer in Logic, you can see that the channel strip is a special one that has an arrow at the bottom because each individual slot has its own channel. So this creates basically a folder with an individual channel for each piece of the kit. This is my bass drum, side stick, snare. As you can see, they all have its own dedicated fader and channel. And it also creates two aux sends with a reverb and a delay. Of course, this can be changed, but automatically each piece of the kit is assigned to a send. So this is very convenient for mixing. Once I've created my kit, now it's time to program some fun patterns. To do so, I can close my kit here and close my folder. And to create a drum machine pattern is very simple. I'm going to right click on my timeline here and select Create Pattern Region. This is a special region that allows me to see all the instruments that I have loaded on my kit as individual lines, and for each individual instrument of my drum kit, I can simply turn on or off a certain pattern location. This is pretty much like an old-fashioned drum machine pattern sequencing interface. So I can look at my bass drum right here, and if I want a bass drum every quarter note, I simply have to turn on each event on this 16 events pattern. The steps of the pattern are set up here. That's why I have 16 events. So if I press play now, I put down my kick. Now if I want to put a snare, for example, now let's say I want to put a hi-hat, so as you can see, it's very simple to create some pretty fun and interesting patterns. Now, if I want to change the velocity of a step, I can simply open up the lanes. These are like sub lanes with extra information for each step. And so if I want to make this a little bit softer and maybe this one a little bit softer, actually, let's make this one, yeah, instead this one. Okay, it's very easy to do. And same thing for the hi-hat. You also have access to the note repeat. Now, the note repeat is an interesting feature that allows me to create multiple events inside a specific step. So I can have 3 events inside this step. So very, very cool, because now I can work on different variation of this. So I can just copy this pattern here, right? And now work on this pattern and say, I want a second snare here. So this is the first pattern. Now second pattern coming up with the extra snare. And maybe this pattern here can have a shaker. And remember that each one has an individual volume. So if I want to lower my shaker, so very, very powerful. And again, we just created a new kit with our vintage samples and created some interesting patterns. If I want to create some random variations, I can also do that. So I'm going to make a copy now again of this pattern. And if I go and select a certain sound, a certain sample, for example, my close hi-hat, if I go to functions, I can go to randomize raw values, and I can randomize pretty much anything. I can randomize the velocity, step on and off, so if there is a step or not, the gate, the note, right? If I skip it, and the step rate. So if I go to step on and off, it randomized the hi-hat steps. And I can keep randomizing until I find something that I'm happy with. I can also randomize the note repeat. And I can do the same for my shaker if I want to be creative. So very, very cool. I mean, you can do a lot with this and get very creative, and not only in terms of sounds, but also in terms of patterns. So as you can see, this combined with the editor, the drum machine editor, I mean, it's really, really powerful to create some interesting groove, interesting sounds, interesting sonorities, and to quickly create some really, really good pop beats. Of course, there is a preset library for the patterns that you can access by clicking here. I can access pre-made patterns for bass, drums, or for melodies. To save a pattern, you can go up here and just select Save Pattern. You can give it a name if you want. So this could be like Groovy 1. pick another one, and again save it. So you can create quickly a great library of patterns that you can use in any project. So I hope you like the Drum Machine Designer, and I hope you're going to have a lot of fun with it.